Stephen had learned to measure time in two ways now, before Christina and after. The after had been 3 years of mornings that felt like wading through fog, of Haley's small voice asking questions he couldn't answer, of rooms in their apartment that echoed with absence. 3 years of being both mother and father to a 7-year-old girl who still sometimes set the table for 3 people out of habit. But standing in front of 1847 Auburn Street on a cold October morning, Stephen felt something shift. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too ambitious, too fragile, more like possibility. The house was a disaster. Everyone had told him that. A money pit, his brother had said. A tear-down waiting to happen, the realtor had warned, though she'd still taken his offer. Stephen didn't care. He needed a project. He needed something broken that he could actually fix. The Victorian stood crooked on its foundation, paint peeling like sunburned skin, shutters hanging at angles that defied physics. The porch sagged in the middle, creating a smile or a frown, depending on where you stood. Haley stood beside him, her small hand tucked into his, staring up at their new disaster. "It looks like a haunted house," she said matter-of-factly. "It looks like home," Stephen replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Mom would have hated it. Haley's words were casual, but Stephen felt them like a hand squeezing his heart. She talked about Christina in present tense sometimes, as if her mother had just stepped out to the store and would be back any minute with observations about architectural disasters. "Yeah," Stephen agreed, smiling despite the ache. "She would have made a list of everything wrong with it before we even got inside." "A very long list," Haley added. "The longest." They stood there together, mourning and remembering, until Haley tugged his hand. "Can we go in now? I want to see my room." The inside was somehow worse and better than Stephen had imagined. Worse because the floors groaned with every step, the wallpaper curled away from the walls like it was trying to escape, and there was a suspicious stain on the ceiling that suggested the roof had opinions about keeping water outside. Better, because despite all of it, the house had bones. Good bones, his contractor friend would say. High ceilings, original crown molding, a fireplace in every room, and windows that once cleaned would flood the space with light. "It's perfect," Haley declared, spinning in the empty living room. Stephen watched his daughter twirl, her brown hair, Christina's hair, flying out around her. In that moment, covered in dust motes that danced in the afternoon sun, she looked so much like her mother that Stephen had to turn away and pretend to examine a loose baseboard. They spent the first week just cleaning, uncovering the house's secrets layer by layer. Stephen worked during Haley's school hours, then again after she went to bed, fueled by coffee and the peculiar satisfaction of watching something neglected slowly come back to life. It was therapeutic in a way his grief counselor's office had never been. You couldn't argue with a broken window or negotiate with rotted floorboards. You just fixed them, one at a time, until the work was done. The basement Stephen had been avoiding, it smelled of mildew and mystery, the kind of space that made even the most rational person believe in ghosts. But 2 weeks into the renovation, he ran out of excuses. The furnace was down there, and winter was coming. He descended the wooden stairs carefully, testing each step. The basement was larger than he'd expected, stretching the full length of the house, divided by old brick walls into smaller rooms. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the archaeological layers of previous owners. Boxes of Christmas decorations from the 1970s, a bicycle with a flat tire, paint cans dried solid decades ago, a stack of National Geographic magazines yellowed with age. In the farthest corner, behind a workbench that might have been oak once, Stephen found a wooden chest. It was unlocked, the hinges protesting as he opened it. Inside were the kinds of things people save but never look at. Old letters tied with string, photographs of people whose names had been forgotten, a pocket watch that no longer ticked, and at the bottom, in a leather folder that had somehow survived the basement's moisture, a marriage certificate. Stephen pulled it out carefully, the paper brittle with age. The handwriting was ornate, the kind they didn't teach anymore. This certifies that on June 14, 1952, Thomas Henry Brennan and Mary Catherine Wells were joined in holy matrimony at St. Augustine's Church, witnessed by God and congregation. Stephen studied the names, running his finger over the careful calligraphy. Thomas and Mary. He wondered who they'd been, what their story was, if they'd been happy. The certificate had been preserved so carefully, placed in a leather folder and stored in this chest as if it mattered, as if it was precious. That evening, after Haley was asleep, Stephen found himself sitting at his laptop, curiosity getting the better of him. He searched for Thomas Henry Brennan and Mary Catherine Wells, adding 1952 and the city name to narrow the results. Nothing. He tried variations, just the names, then with different combinations of middle names, then without middle names. He searched the church, St. Augustine's, and found it had been demolished in 1975 to make room for a shopping centre. He tried the census records, marriage licenses, obituaries, nothing. It was as if Thomas and Mary had never existed. Stephen leaned back in his chair, unsettled. He'd expected to find something, a brief obituary, a property record, a mention in some dusty archive. But there was nothing, no birth records, no death certificates, no evidence that two people named Thomas Brennan and Mary Wells had ever married or even existed. It shouldn't have bothered him. They were strangers from 70 years ago, ghosts in someone else's story. But it did bother him. Someone had saved this certificate. Someone had thought their marriage mattered enough to preserve it in leather, to store it safely. And now there was no evidence they'd ever been real. The mystery consumed him more than it should have. Between replacing rotted beams and rewiring the electrical, Stephen found himself making trips to the library, scrolling through microfilm of old newspapers, calling the Historical Society. Nothing. The librarian, a woman named Dorothy who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, became his reluctant partner in the search. It's possible they use different names, Dorothy suggested one afternoon, peering at a photocopy of the certificate Stephen had made. People did that sometimes, changed names, started over. This was post-war, remember? Lots of people were reinventing themselves. But why keep the certificate if you were trying to disappear? Dorothy smiled sadly. Maybe because some things are too important to forget, even when you're trying to. That night, Stephen dreamed of Christina. Not the Christina from the hospital, thin and pale and slipping away. The Christina from before, laughing, vibrant, her hands covered in paint from one of her projects. In the dream, she was standing in the living room of the Auburn Street house, but it was finished, beautiful, filled with light. "You're fixing the wrong things," Dream Christina said, not unkindly. "What do you mean?" She gestured around the room. "The house is just a house, Stephen. What are you really trying to repair?" He woke with tears on his face and Haley standing beside his bed, her small hand on his shoulder. "You were crying in your sleep," she said. "Were you dreaming about Mom?" Stephen pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "Yeah, baby, I was. Do you think she knows we moved? Do you think she likes the new house?" The questions broke him and mended him at the same time. "I think she knows, and I think she's happy we're trying something new, even though it's haunted and falling apart." Stephen laughed through his tears. "Especially because it's haunted and falling apart. You know how your mom loved a good project?" The breakthrough in the mystery came from an unexpected source. Stephen had been replacing the floorboards in what would become Haley's room when he found another piece of the puzzle, a small leather journal wedged between two joists. The pages were water-damaged, many illegible, but enough remained to read. The handwriting was feminine, careful. March 1953. "It's been 9 months since we became Mr. and Mrs. in the eyes of God, if no one else. Thomas still worries about being found, but I tell him we're building something real here, something that matters more than paper and officials. We chose each other. Isn't that what marriage really is? Stephen's hands trembled as he turned the pages, piecing together a story. Thomas and Mary hadn't been able to legally marry. Thomas had been black, Mary had been white, and in 1952, in their state, interracial marriage had still been illegal. They couldn't get a legal license, couldn't have their union recognized by any courthouse, so they'd created their own certificate, their own acknowledgement of their commitment, and hidden it away like treasure. The journal chronicled their life together in this house. Thomas had been a carpenter, Mary a seamstress. They'd bought the property using Mary's name. "Because the world isn't ready for us yet, but someday it will be," she'd written. They'd built a life in the margins, loving each other in a time and place that considered their love illegal. The last entry was dated December 1954. Thomas says we should burn everything, destroy the evidence. It's too dangerous, he says, and he's probably right. But I can't destroy our marriage certificate, even if the state doesn't recognize it, even if we have to hide who we are. This paper proves that what we have is real. It proves we chose each other. Maybe someday someone will find it and understand that love was always love, even when the law said otherwise. Stephen sat on the floor of his daughter's unfinished room, the journal in his hands, and wept. Not just for Thomas and Mary, whoever they'd been, wherever they'd gone, but for Christina, for himself, for the way love persists even when everything else crumbles, for the way people build and rebuild, hide and seek, hold on and let go. That evening he told Haley the story, simplified but true. They sat in the living room, surrounded by sawdust and possibility, and talked about Thomas and Mary, about love that had to hide, about people who chose each other when the world told them not to. "That's so sad," Haley said. "Did they get to stay together?" "I don't know, honey. I hope so. Maybe that's why the house feels the way it does," Haley said thoughtfully. "Maybe they left some of their love here, and that's what you've been feeling." Stephen looked at his daughter, this wise little person who was half Christina, half himself, and completely her own miracle. "Maybe you're right. We should finish the house for them," Haley declared with 7-year-old certainty. "Make it beautiful, so their love has somewhere nice to be." It became their shared project then, not just Stephen's. Haley helped paint her room a soft yellow that reminded Stephen of sunrise. They refinished the hardwood floors together, Haley wielding a paintbrush while Stephen handled the sander. They planted rose bushes in the front yard. "Because Mary would have wanted flowers," Haley insisted. As the house transformed, so did Stephen. He started sleeping through the night. He stopped flinching when he heard Christina's favorite song on the radio. He began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting or replacing or moving on. It was about making room for both grief and joy, for both memory and possibility. One Saturday in April, 6 months after they'd moved in, Stephen and Haley planted a tree in the backyard, a dogwood, because Christina had loved them. As they patted soil around the roots, Haley spoke up. "Dad, do you think you'll ever fall in love again?" The question caught Stephen off guard. "I don't know, Hales. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, her hands muddy. "I just think Mum would want you to be happy. And Thomas and Mary, they loved each other, even though it was hard. Maybe love is always worth it, even when it's scary." Stephen pulled his daughter close, kissing the top of her head. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," she replied with perfect confidence. "You just cry too much to notice." Stephen laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. The final piece of the mystery solved itself on a warm day in May. Stephen was at the hardware store, debating paint colors for the kitchen, when an elderly black man approached him. "Excuse me," the man said. "I couldn't help but notice your address on that form you're filling out. 1847 Auburn Street." "Yes, sir," Stephen replied. "Do you know the house?" The man's eyes grew distant. "I used to. My father lived there a long time ago, he and his wife." He paused, seeming to measure Stephen. "They weren't able to be together officially, if you understand my meaning." Stephen's heart began to race. "Thomas and Mary?" The old man's eyes widened. "How do you—" "I found some things in the house, a certificate, a journal. I've been trying to find out what happened to them." They moved to a bench outside the store, and the man introduced himself as James Brennan, Thomas's son from a relationship before Mary. He told Stephen the rest of the story. Thomas and Mary had lived at Auburn Street for 3 years before the pressure became too much. Death threats, harassment from neighbors who suspected the truth, the constant fear of violence. They'd eventually fled north to a state where their marriage could be legal, where they could be safe. "They lived another 40 years together," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Happy years. They had 2 children, 5 grandchildren. My father died in 1994, Mary in 2001. They were married, really legally married, for over 40 years. Why didn't they come back for the certificate?" James smiled. "Dad said it belonged to the house. That house was where they first chose each other, where they first built something real. He wanted to leave that there, like a blessing for whoever came after, a reminder that love persists." Stephen felt tears running down his face and didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'm glad they made it. I'm glad they got their happy ending." "There's no such thing as an ending," James said gently, "just continuations. My father and Mary, they continued their love story somewhere new. But it started in that house, in that choice they made to honor their commitment even when no one else would." They talked for another hour, James sharing stories, Stephen soaking them in. Before they parted, James took Stephen's hand. "My father would be glad someone like you found that certificate. Someone who understood that houses are more than just walls. They're witnesses. They hold our stories, our choices, our love. You take care of that house and it'll take care of you." That night, Stephen framed the marriage certificate and hung it in the hallway, next to a photo of himself and Christina on their wedding day, and a drawing Haley had made of their new house. A wall of commitments, of choices, of love persisting. Haley stood beside him, examining the arrangement. "It looks good there," she said. "Like they all belong together." "They do," Stephen agreed. "It's all the same story, really. People choosing love, people building homes, people holding on to what matters. And people fixing broken things," Haley added. "And people fixing broken things," Stephen echoed. The house on Auburn Street would never be perfect. There were quirks that no amount of renovation could fix. A door that stuck in summer, a window that rattled in winter, floorboards that creaked in particular patterns. But it was home. Not because it was flawless, but because it held their story now, alongside Thomas and Mary's, alongside all the other lives that had passed through these rooms. Stephen had come to Auburn Street thinking he needed to fix a house. What he'd discovered was that the house was fixing him. Every nail driven, every wall painted, every room restored had been part of his own restoration. The house had shown him that things can be broken and still be beautiful, that stories can be lost and still matter, that love persists even when everything else falls apart. 3 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Stephen was sanding the last of the kitchen cabinets when the doorbell rang. He answered it to find a woman about his age holding a casserole dish, looking nervous. "Hi," she said. "I'm Rachel. I live 2 houses down. I've been watching you fix up this place, and I just wanted to bring a welcome to the neighborhood casserole. Very late welcome, I know, but better late than never." Stephen smiled, genuinely smiled, and took the dish. "Thank you. That's really kind. I'm Stephen." "I know," Rachel said, then blushed. "I mean, I asked around. Not in a creepy way, just in a who's the guy bringing the haunted house back to life way. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, both laughing, and Stephen felt something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Not certainty, not assumption, just the gentle possibility that his story might have new chapters yet to be written. "Would you like to come in?" he asked. "I can give you a tour. My daughter's here. She's 7. She's painting her room for the 3rd time because she keeps changing her mind about the color." "I'd like that," Rachel said. As Stephen led her inside, pointing out the original moldings and the refinished floors, he found himself telling her about Thomas and Mary, about the certificate in the basement, about the love that had persisted in the margins. And Rachel listened, really listened, and understood. Standing in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Mary had probably cooked meals, where Thomas had probably read the paper, where they'd built their hidden life together, Stephen felt Christina's presence. Not haunting, not sad, but present, like a blessing, like permission, like love persisting. That night, after Rachel had left and Haley was in bed, Stephen stood in the hallway, looking at the wall of photographs and certificates. Thomas and Mary's marriage certificate in its careful calligraphy, his and Christina's wedding photo, Christina's smile bright enough to power the sun, Haley's drawing of their home, and now, taped beside them, a small note in Haley's handwriting that she must have added while he wasn't looking. "Our family. The old ones, the new ones, and the ones still coming. All the stories that make a home." Stephen read it 3 times, each time feeling his heart crack open a little wider, making room for everything, for grief and joy, for memory and possibility, for the love that was and the love that might be. The house creaked around him, settling into the night, holding their stories in its bones. Outside, the dogwood tree they'd planted swayed in the spring breeze. Upstairs, Haley slept soundly in her yellow room, and Stephen stood in the hallway of 1847 Auburn Street, feeling both broken and whole, knowing that sometimes they were the same thing. He wasn't the man he'd been before Christina died. He would never be that man again. But he was becoming someone new, someone shaped by grief but not defined by it, someone who understood that houses and hearts could be renovated, restored, brought back to life, one careful repair at a time. The marriage certificate of 2 people who had never officially existed had taught him that love needs no permission, no official recognition, no legal validation. It simply is. It persists. It builds homes in the margins and leaves blessings in the basement, waiting to be found by someone who needs to remember that broken things can be beautiful, that hidden stories matter, that second chances come in unexpected forms. Stephen turned off the hallway light and headed to his room, ready for sleep, ready for tomorrow, ready for whatever came next. Behind him in the darkness, the photographs and certificates bore witness to love, to loss, to the continuing story of a house on Auburn Street that had learned to hold it all. So here we are, at the end of Stephen and Haley's story, or maybe just at the end of this chapter. I wonder, where are you watching this from? Are you in a place that feels like home, or are you still searching for it? Did this story make you feel something, remind you of something, or teach you something about the way we rebuild after loss? Maybe you've got your own fixer-upper, literal or metaphorical. Maybe you're patching holes and painting over old wounds, trying to make something broken beautiful again. Or maybe you're like Thomas and Mary, loving in the margins, waiting for the world to catch up to your heart. Whatever your story is, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, what lesson did you take away from Stephen's journey? What's one thing you're trying to fix or restore in your own life right now? And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that broken things can be beautiful and that love persists even in the hardest times, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one waiting to be told, more houses holding secrets, more single dads finding their way back to hope, Until next time, remember, you're not just fixing houses or hearts. You're building something that will matter to someone someday. You're leaving your own certificate in the basement, your own proof that love was here, that you chose to keep going, that your story mattered. Take care of yourselves out there, and take care of your homes, whatever form they take.